Hello and welcome. Welcome to our couch lessons. I'm very happy that again so many people from all over the world are joining us. My name is Jeanette and I work for the Goethe-Institut in Munich. Maybe not everyone is familiar with the Goethe-Institut, so I will just say two sentences about it. The Goethe-Institut is the worldwide active cultural institute of the Federal Republic of Germany. We promote the study of the German language abroad, and we also encourage an international cultural exchange. We want to deal with the topic AI because we think that it has and it will have a huge impact on our society. Artificial intelligence will contribute to a new revolution in human history. And with our large project, Generation A is algorithm, we want to sensitize young adults for this technology. We want to present the developments in this field and at the same time reflect on them critically. A dialogue between different countries, between different disciplines and backgrounds is really important for this. For example, with artists and their creative approaches to AI. We believe that the Goethe-Institut can establish such a dialogue. And the couch lessons, a format of the project Generation A, funded by the Federal Foreign Office, is a very good example for it. Every week, always on Wednesday, we invite AI experts from all over the world to discuss with us and with you the risks, the challenges, and also the opportunities presented by the developments in the field of AI. With the couch lessons, we want to initiate a discussion outside the technology-savvy community. We want to question what AI is and what it could and should decide. We also want to ask if there is a way beyond surveillance, disinformation, manipulation, and commerce. We ask whether AI endangers democracy or privacy. And we ask if AI can solve some of the big problems of our time, like climate change or inequalities. Today, we want to deal with the topic inequality, among others. During our couch lesson AI and economy, we will discuss about the concept of smart money. We will ask how AI influences the income gap in society and if AI could promote social justice. So let's find some answers. I hope you have made yourself comfortable already, maybe on a couch, and that you will spend a pleasant hour with us. I also hope that you enjoyed the music we played at the beginning. It was composed by Terence Saffern. The American singer-songwriter uses AI to help generating percussion, melodies, and chords. The idea that artificial intelligence can compose music is scary for a lot of people. But music making AI software has advanced so far in the past few years that it's no longer a frightening novelty. It's a tool that can and is being used by producers to help in the creative process. But this fact raises difficult questions. Could AI one day replace artists? And could AI also take over other genuinely human skills in the future? And what do we mean exactly when we talk about these human skills? Almost every discussion about AI leads us to very deep philosophical questions, and I think they will come up today as well. But first, I have a question for you related to our today's topic, and I want to start a little poll. So, do you think that AI will widen the gap between rich and poor? As long as we wait for your answers, I would like to inform you briefly about some guidelines of our couch lessons. First, the invited experts will give an input, each about 10 minutes long. And after that, we will open the discussion. Please use our chat to type in your questions, and I will go through the chat and pick out some of these questions. And after the inputs, I will ask different persons to contribute their questions personally. But if I don't ask you to talk, please turn off your microphone. I also want you to know that the entire event is recorded, but we will just record the persons that are speaking. So let's have a look on the results of our poll. No, it's still going on, but I stop it here. As you hopefully can see, most of the people are not really sure if AI will widen the gap. Some of you are saying maybe, but there are other reasons as well. And 43% are saying yes, it will widen the gap. And just a small amount, 10%, are thinking that AI will not widen this gap or maybe also lead to some social justice instead. So with this results, I want to hand over to Martin, who co-curated the series and who is the moderator of it. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Jeanette. Hello, everybody. I'm Martin Törnqvist, and I'm a curator and concept developer based in Malmö, in the very south of Sweden. And with us today, we have Jonas Hedman, Alex Trott, and Julian Jacobs. They are tuning in from Malmö as well, San Francisco, and London. And I'm super excited to hear them share their knowledge and experiences on today's topic, which is AI and economy. But before we kick off, please do what some of you has already done, which is to share in the chat where you are dialing in from. The chat is also a great place to float your thoughts and ideas and ask questions to the speakers. At the end, we will pick up some of the questions and ask you to ask them directly to the speakers. So the economy is one of these vast and highly systemic topics that we love to engage with in the couch lessons. We do so both because we see that AI has the potential to play a big role, but also because it's an area that affects people, all of us really, whether we want it or not. So our focus today is on the parts of the economy that traditionally are controlled by nation states and are important interfaces to the citizens that inhabits them. We're going to talk about money, and we're going to talk about tax systems, how they're being set up, controlled, and managed. And we're going to discuss what's wrong with the current ways of doing things and what opportunities are posed by technologies such as artificial intelligence. We're also going to look at the risks at play when new technologies are implemented at large scale. In the case of the economy, with unfair divisions of collective wealth and the growing divide between rich and poor. So needless to say, I'm very excited about the coming 50 minutes. And I want us to get started right away with our first speaker, who is going to kick us off with some history and potential futures of money. And with us to do that, we have Jonas Hedman. He is a professor at the Department of Digitalization at the Copenhagen Business School. And his research covers topics such as payments, payment ecosystems, and digital traces. And he's currently working on the cashless society. So please beam your energy to Jonas Hedman. The screen and microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Martin, almost a neighbor close by here. That was only by coincidence. And it's going to be really nice to talk to you a little bit about some ideas we have about smart money. I will shortly share a screen there, my presentation there. Remember that I only have 10 minutes. So all the profound implications for people with smart money, I don't have time to address. In part, I think both Alex and Julian will complement what I say from different perspectives, so have that in mind. So over to my screen here. So I hope, let's see, and I will put it in. So there's my, so if anyone would like to have some contact, you also have my email address there. So just coming into my background with money, and money is something that I really love to talk about and research. So coming from Sweden, we have an interesting phenomenon here. Cash is dying. And one of the recent studies that I'm working with some colleagues from Stockholm is that Sweden will be a cashless society by 2023. With cashless, we refer to a society where cash will not be an accepted medium of exchange. And what is going on, particularly in Sweden, is this huge decrease of cash in circulation. So this is a number from late 2017, the arrows here. This is the amount of cash in circulation. At that time, it was roughly 57 billion Swedish crowns. Now it's down below 40 billion Swedish crowns. and this is an ongoing. It has also been a dramatic change over the past this year due to the pandemic. So, and then coming back to money and the smart money there. Money is something I do love, but money is stupid. And any money you can basically use for anything. You can buy whatever thing you would like. And that is good for some aspects, but it also has some limitations. And then also remember that money on one hand is when you use money, you don't really use money, you use something called payment instruments. So there's a layer between the amount of money that you possess and how you use that money via your payment instrument. And that could be a payment card or an account transfer or something like that, or via your mobile phone. So what we envision in the future is that we will have some type of smart money. And the smart money is something that we view as a type of exchange instrument based on some type of computer protocol, which in principle verifies and facilitates the condition for its appropriation as a payment. And since it's based on a computer protocol, you can design the money. And you can design it to control what can be purchased, who can purchase, when someone can purchase, where something can be purchased, and whom can be the payer or payee. So with this in our mind, I will give some scenarios of how one could use or how one can envision the use of smart money in society. And I think actually the both remaining presentation will address these topics in a different way. So one thing is that it can be used to mitigate misuse of public funds. So this is a case from Denmark. There was a woman who had 2 children and she was living on welfare money, and she asked for more money from the government. And she got the money to buy clothing for her children. But she went to the Canary Islands instead and never bought any clothing for her children. So here's a fairness of should people, so with smart money, one can control these behaviors or these spendings. So the money that she would have received from the government could only be used to buy clothing for her children. So that's one type of use case. Of course, it has a lot of integrity and privacy issues, but let that be for the time being. Another one that is, I think, of maybe much more interesting is addressing the prevention of corruption. I did this presentation a couple of years ago, and I had some participants from both some African countries and South America. And they said they love the idea of smart money. That would actually give the citizens of a country to oversee governmental spendings, basically in that sense, prevent corruptions by government officials. And that would be a boost for us, the democratization of society, if the citizens could control the governmental spendings by different politicians or governmental agencies. A third one that I do find also utterly appealing, considering in particular that I am working in Sweden and Denmark. We have had some issues with, in particular, Russian people using Nordic and Scandinavian banks to launder money and shuffling via Estonia and then back out to the Caribbean. And with smart money, where there is a trace on the money, this would make anti-money laundering much more easier for banks in particular to do. Because criminals in general are very, very smart, and they know how to manage the payment system so they can shuffle money from one part of the world to another part of the world. So with these, with smart money, this would become much more difficult. Then, which we'll come back to the final presentation here, is that smart money would also create an opportunity to change how we do, for instance, taxation. Normally, for those that have been working or are working in a company, you know that every firm needs to do quarterly or monthly tax returns for VAT reporting. It takes a lot of time and doesn't add any value to a firm. But with smart money, taxation can be done in real time. So when you spend something, X amount of the money will go automatically to the taxation office. And this would be a very good use case for that would be for the gig economy. And actually there were discussions in Denmark to implement this kind of system to in particularly regulate or collect money from Airbnb in Denmark. So when you buy some or you spend something for Airbnb, there will be an automatic transfer to Danish tax authorities. Of course, this requires a lot of things, and this kind of principle can also be used within a company to change the traditional ways of how we do budgeting and controlling within firms. That we can use smart money to do the budgeting and controlling systems within companies. So that was my short introduction to smart money. So thank you very much, and over to Martin.
Thank you very much, Jonas. We will invite you back at the end for the Q&A. So please, everybody, ask questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to incorporate them in the discussion after the talks. And our next speaker is Alex Trott. He is a research scientist at Salesforce, where he is spearheading the AI Economist, an open source framework for economic policy design, aimed to develop an AI social planner to optimize economic possibilities and improve social welfare in the real world. So to what Jonas just spoke about, help us create a better tax systems. So please welcome Alex Trott, and the screen and microphone is yours.
All right, thanks, Martin. Let me just get my screen going here. I'm currently prevented from sharing my screen.
Still prevented?
Oh, there it goes.
Great.
Okay, how's that?
Looks great. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, well, hi, everybody. I'm Alex. I'm a research scientist at Salesforce Research. And I just want to say thanks to the Goethe-Institut and the organizers of this seminar for having me here. I'm really excited to tell you about some recent work from our group titled The AI Economist, Improving Equality and Productivity with AI-Driven Tax Policies. So our group's long-term goal is to see AI used as a tool to improve economic policymaking. And this work is our first step towards that goal, and it focuses specifically on tax policy. And before jumping in, I just want to acknowledge the many people who contributed to this project, in particular, Stefan Zhang, who leads the AI Economist team. So I mentioned the work I'm talking about, it deals with finding taxation policies that improve productivity and equality. Now, why focus on this problem? Well, there are two main reasons. One, inequality is a serious and worsening problem globally. Over the last several decades, the world has enjoyed higher productivity, meaning more wealth, but it's increasingly concentrated among fewer and fewer people. And the second reason is that optimal taxation is a hard problem. It's characterized by this intrinsic trade-off between equality and productivity. And so getting taxes right is essentially the problem of striking the right balance between equality and productivity so that the society is as happy as it can be. Now, just to unpack this a little bit, taxes are a key government tool to improve equality because it enables wealth transfer. But at the same time, taxes lower the incentive to work, which results in less productivity or less overall wealth to transfer. And the forces that affect this trade-off can actually be quite complex. And we don't believe that traditional economics are equipped to handle this challenge fully. So the standard economist toolkit has a few key weaknesses, in particular, needs data that are very hard to get, relies on analytical solutions that are built from overly simplistic models that miss out on a lot of important complexities, and they're very hard to validate in the real world. And that leads us to the work I'm here to tell you about. And this is work where we introduce the AI economist. So the AI economist is the first reinforcement learning tool for tax policy design. But as I mentioned, taxes are kind of a case study here. This is part of a much larger goal. And our goal really is to see this as a framework where we can use AI to develop economic simulations that allow us to learn economic policies in order to optimize social welfare objectives. And we think that this could be a tool that economists and governments can use to safely test and accelerate different economic policies, and that its implementation could improve equality and productivity on a global scale or other definitions of social welfare. And what we also really value is that this could encourage transparent economic decision-making. And we're really excited about this, and we're happy to see that others are too. This work has already been covered by a few major venues, and we're hoping this list will continue to grow with time. So let's jump on in. I want to use the next few slides to tell you about how we make use of AI to solve optimal taxation. So the key AI technology here is reinforcement learning, and we use it in two ways. Briefly alluded to this earlier. The first way we're using it is to build an economic simulation with smart agents whose behavior is driven by AI. Now, these smart agents represent the individuals in an economy in the simulation. And the second way we're going to use reinforcement learning is to learn a policy for setting taxes that optimizes equality and productivity. And we're going to learn this inside of the simulation. Just as a basic primer on reinforcement learning, which I might refer to as RL out of habit, this is a trial and error learning algorithm that uses an interaction loop with some environment. And essentially the goal is to be able to map some observations you get from your environment to some actions, and to learn to do that in a way that maximizes the reward you get over the lifetime through those actions. You've probably heard of RL before. It's the same technology that was used to learn to master adversarial games like Go and StarCraft. But our vision is to use RL to help people make smarter economic policy decisions and ultimately to improve social welfare. So let's take a closer look at our economic simulation. Overall, it's pretty simple. In this one, there are 4 AI agents. They interact with the spatial world in a handful of ways. They can move around to collect resources like wood and stone. And then they can use those resources to build houses, which earns them money, which they like because it's money. And they can buy and sell these resources with one another by trading. And in the background, the income that they are earning is getting taxed and then redistributed. So all the income that gets taxed gets evenly redistributed. You can think of this kind of like a universal basic income. And when we're learning these tax policies through the AI economist, what we're essentially doing is learning what the tax rates should be. So there are a few key ingredients to put into this simulation to make it an economic simulation. In particular, we need to make earning income costly. It's not fun to work. And there's different opportunities for different agents to earn money, which is basically where the income inequality comes from. And in addition, they experience a law of diminishing returns. So there's a limit to how much agents want to work. And the important thing is that taxes shift that willingness inward so that there's less work with higher taxes. And just with these few ingredients, RL figures out the rest. In fact, the behaviors that you're seeing in this animation are all learned from reinforcement learning. And without programming it in, this leads to agents that learn specialization, which is a hallmark of real economies. In this, you can see that primarily one agent focuses on building houses, whereas the rest specialize in collecting resources and selling them to that builder agent. And we acknowledge that this is a very simple simulation, but it's still way more complex than models economists typically use to describe optimal taxation. And we think offers some interesting opportunities. So the AI-driven simulation here allows us to compare different tax schemes. And this slide shows you the outcomes we observed. Now we're comparing our learned AI economist tax policy in green with three baselines: the free market, which is when there's no taxes at all; the US federal, which is a tax schedule that's based on what the US federal income tax looks like; and the SIAS formula. The SIAS formula is a theoretically optimal formula for what taxes should be. And as a reminder, we expect there to be this trade-off between equality and productivity. We're not directly programming it in, but it does exist, and it emerges through what reinforcement learning gives us. And you can see this in these plots because compared to the free market, taxes always hurt productivity to some extent, as shown on the left. And they also always improve equality to some extent, as shown in the middle plot. But the point here is that the AI economist learns to find the biggest improvement to equality at the smallest cost in productivity. And it ultimately improves this equality times productivity metric by 16% compared to the theoretically optimal SIAS formula. We don't have time to really dig into how the AI economist does so well, but we can at least look at the tax rate it learns and how they shift wealth. So these left plots show the typical tax rates for the three different tax models. The US federal is a progressive tax schedule, which means that each new dollar you earn is taxed more than the last one. And the SIAS formula recommends the opposite, or what we might describe as a regressive tax formula. But the taxes learned by the AI economist don't really fit into either classification. They're somewhere in between. But the plot on the right shows you what the effect of these tax schedules are in terms of the redistribution and the taxes paid. So positive numbers here means that agents paid more than they got back from the government, and negative numbers means that you got more, or that the opposite, so that the government basically paid you. And the counterintuitive thing here is that we actually see less redistribution, because less extreme numbers, with the progressive US federal tax scheme. In fact, the redistribution is strongest when using the AI economist taxes. And so I think the key takeaway here is that the AI economist taxes don't necessarily match our normal intuitions for what they should look like, but they end up getting better results. And we think this is a key lesson for how we can use AI to solve these complex problems where our normal intuitions don't take us as far as we would like. Now, shifting gears and looking to the future, we see this work as a first step towards a much larger goal of using AI to improve policymaking with many exciting opportunities and challenges. So on the one hand, there are many ways to apply knowledge from the domain of economics, in particular to improve simulation design and be able to tackle new problems, and also aligning the goals of society with what the goals of the RL policies are. And ultimately, this is all in service of moving towards real world applications. And on the other hand, there are also some key challenges coming from the AI side of things. This is a really tricky problem to solve with reinforcement learning, so there's some improvement to do there. And one of the key issues is dealing with the gap between the real world and simulation, also known as reality gaps. This is an important problem for transferring to the real world. And ultimately, we need to find ways to explain the AI-driven policy recommendations to people so that we can build trust and transparency, which is a key step if we ever want to use this in the real world. And because this is such a big challenge, we do want to get as many people on board as possible. So if you're interested to learn more, you can check out this blog post on the left where Stefan outlines our team's long-term vision. Or if code is your thing, our simulation framework is open source, and you can find more and contribute through our GitHub page. But with that, I just want to say thanks again to the organizers for this amazing series and for giving me the chance to present our work. I hope I've been able to inspire you to think about AI as a tool for improving economic policy and social welfare in the long run. If you have any questions, I'm happy to address them in the QA portion, but in the meantime, thanks again.
Thank you very much, Alex. And I see that there are some really good questions coming in the chat, and we will come to them in just a minute. But first to our third and last speaker, who's going to talk about how new technological development has affected and how AI might affect economic inequalities going forward. And with us, we have Julian Jacobs. He is a recent graduate of the Brown University, and he's currently pursuing a master's degree in global studies and political economy at the London School of Economics. And for the past 3 years, his research has focused on the effects of artificial intelligence and digitalization on economic inequality. So please beam your energy to Julian Jacobs. The screen and microphone is yours.
Great, thank you. So I just want to begin by saying thank you to the Goethe-Institut again. I really enjoyed listening to those first couple speeches. What I want to do in this talk is something slightly different. We've heard a lot so far about the underlying technology of artificial intelligence and some really interesting ways that it could be applied. But what I want to talk about is what the political and economic effects of AI might look like. And so hence the title of this talk. And the speech that I'm about to give, it's US focused, but maybe that's fitting given the week that we're in. And also I think this question about artificial intelligence and inequality is an interesting one to consider, especially right now in the midst of this COVID pandemic. So with a topic complicated as AI and inequality, I think it's helpful to think of some very simplified principles that we can use to try to delineate the contents of this talk. So I'll open up with a proposition. First, inequality due to AI, it's a decision, it's not an event. And so to get to this point, there are three main ideas that I want to put forward today. One, AI's economic effects have historical precedent. Two, AI will likely make inequality worse. Three, there are serious barriers to combating inequality. And we'll go through each of these in order. And again, the central case I want to make today is we really need to make inequality at the forefront of our national conversation. And AI is a central part of that as well. So let's talk about that first point, the idea that AI's effects have historical precedent. One of the most common fears that I hear about AI in my research is this question about joblessness. So here's a setup that might sound a little bit odd. What do Elon Musk, Queen Elizabeth I, and Martin Luther King Jr. all have in common? Probably not very much, but one thing they do have in common is that they were all worried about joblessness within the context of technological innovation. The important point, though, is that they were worried about different technologies at different times. And they share this concern with plenty of other people, from Kurt Vonnegut to the Southern agrarians in the United States. But we could take this back even further, this fear of technology generally. We could talk about the story of Prometheus in Greek mythology, who was punished for learning about the technology of fire. The story ends with the vultures eating his eternally regenerating liver, and Zeus punishing all of us mortals with illness, war, and death. That's a rough start for technological innovation, but it shows us a little bit about how we've conceptualized new technological ideas throughout history. We're constantly offering up a negative portrait of technology, but on the crucial economic idea of joblessness, the notion that we will be without work, that's a narrative that persists, but it simply is not true. And the reason why is because of this idea of efficiency gains, what economists call efficiency gains. And that's the general principle that technology leads to productivity gains, which spur lower costs and therefore lower prices. And that means consumers can spend more in other industries, ultimately creating new jobs. This is why slightly over 100 years ago, roughly 70% of Americans worked in agriculture, but few do now. The economy is changing rapidly all the time. And more recently, manufacturing went from 25% of all employment in 1950 to just about 10% today. So in total, 1/3 of the jobs that existed in the United States 25 years ago did not exist, no longer exist today. So now going into the next slide, we're bad at imagining which jobs will be destroyed by automation, but generally this is a principle that has remained relatively constant throughout economic history. And its current state, there's no reason to believe AI will fundamentally change this story. It doesn't break the most fundamental and basic economic pieces of logic about how innovation affects work. But there are good reasons to worry about the effects of AI on the economy, and that deals with inequality, which I show in this graph right over here. The notion that America's top 1% has over time accumulated more income and even more wealth, that's at this point an uncontroversial idea. And it's a narrative that's widely accepted. Yet the important point is that if we look at this graph and we look at the peaks of inequality around the 1920s and then again today, we can find that those peaks happen during periods of rapid technological expansion and innovation. The first peak was in the 1920s during the Gilded Age, in the time of Rockefeller, when he was bringing in 2.6 million times the average working wage. And it's peaking again now during a period of computerization. So I'm showing this just to exemplify the point that periods of technological innovation tend to correspond with elevated rates of inequality. In the 1920s, it was transport, it was industrial designs, it was widespread disruption of labor, so much so that the US Secretary of Labor at the time was on the record worrying about automation. But we can take this back even further to the Industrial Revolution. It's now also widely accepted that the Luddites, the people who protested the mechanisms that ushered in the Industrial Revolution, they may have been onto something. Though the economy leapt forward and wages and working conditions were relatively stable for a period, they eventually deteriorated and wages stagnated as labor was replaced by capital. So inequality went up. When we think about today, we should expect these exact same trends to hold up. But the question for the second part of the talk is, how does AI actually increase inequality? And then in this next slide here, I go into a little bit more depth about how this happens. So there's a rich literature here that we can cite. In the Industrial Revolution and early 20th century, we see the same mechanisms play out that are beginning to play out today. And the rise of inequality due to technology takes essentially two forms. First, as GDP, that's the total amount of money in the economy, grows because of productivity gains, automation means that workers aren't as valuable for a period, and so their wages stagnate. Meanwhile, capital owners, people who own machines, they see fantastic profits, and that by definition increases inequality. So that's point number one. Point number two is, if we look on the right, we see this weird U-shaped graph. And what that shows is something that economists call a skills divergence. Although automation won't increase unemployment because new jobs pop up, the quality of those jobs is a serious problem. If we put it simply, automation tends to hollow out middle skill, middle wage work and lead to job growth among low wage sectors of the economy and high wage sectors of the economy. In other words, it provides greater financial reward for people whose skills are complemented by technology and punishes people who do not have the training or privilege of education. This matters because rising returns to education and skills explain 75% of the rise in US wage inequality from 1980 to 2000. And that shift is largely a result of early computer innovation. So how should we think about the problem of inequality caused by AI? And with this, I want to go back to the first point of the talk, which is this idea that AI-enabled inequality, it's a decision, it's not an event. Just because technology has a tendency to increase inequality, that does not mean that it must. And we need to, as a community, bring AI into larger discussions of inequality. Too often, research specialization means that people don't really talk about the amalgam of forces that are affecting a change. We talk about a narrow area of it. And that's why it's important to view AI within the context of all the other forces that are promoting inequality in the United States. That's educational inequity, that's assortative mating, the decline of worker unionization, reductions in top marginal tax rates, the decline of the real minimum wage, the presence of tax havens and loopholes for the rich, trade and offshoring without fair compensation for workers at home, the decision to use access to credit as a surrogate for welfare protections in an increasingly unequal country, the unprecedented total of household debt, including credit cards, student loan, and mortgage debt that results from this. Or on the other side, the consolidation of assets and the ability to save money among the rich. And we can see this latter point represented here on this in this graph on the left, which shows the utter polarization of savings in the United States. AI is a part of this story, but it can't be disentangled from the decades of economic free market fundamentalism that it's gotten us here. Unfortunately, there's often apathy in dealing with inequality in the US, or a prevailing sense that inequality is bad, but you know what? How dare our policymakers utilize any of the levers at their disposal to reduce it? And so here it's worth reminding ourselves and those that we talk to why inequality is bad to begin with. Outside of just ethical or ideological beliefs, inequality causes economic instability. It causes economic inefficiency. It reduces mobility. It results in less competition as a result. It makes recessions worse and economic growth harder to sustain. And is a well-established hinder for rising rates of depression, anxiety, homicide, suicide, drug abuse, and overdose. And it's kindled the rise of a radical and intolerant populism around the world that we've been seeing for years now. And this is why it's so important to hold our policymakers accountable, rather than letting them get away with the most banal progressive platitudes or signaling of hashtag wokeness. We should start to do something that takes some guts. And this starts with bringing structural economic issues, rather than just identity-based topics or aesthetic progressivism, to the forefront. Let's talk about increasing access to the earned income tax credit, penalizing CEOs who recklessly enrich themselves with buybacks and then have the audacity to ask for a bailout. Let's talk about giving students who are being crushed by debt a way out. And maybe, just maybe, after 114 million people have fallen into poverty worldwide this year, it's time to tax the over $500 billion in wealth accumulated by billionaires during this pandemic. And above all, at its most simple level, we need to repeat this same phrase time and time again to our elected officials and whoever we talk to on this topic. Inequality is a decision, it's not an event. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Julian. I'm super curious to hear what Jonas and Alex has to say, sort of based on your presentation on smart money and AI as a help for better tax systems, how that could sort of fit into the narrative that Julian has presented, and also sort of what stands in the way for smart money and a better tax system, and when will we see some change happening from your perspectives?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question and really great presentations. I think that's it's a huge problem. All the things that stand in the way. I guess to align what Julian was saying with kind of our perspective, what we hope for is that AI-driven policymaking can shift the conversation more towards what our values are, not towards necessarily what the mechanics of a particular policy ought to be. In line with this philosophy that inequality is a decision, not an event. If it's a decision, then we can decide to try and optimize tax policies to combat inequality and try and do so in a transparent way. And that's essentially the goal as we see it. We don't expect it to be something that everybody jumps to. And the technology isn't even ready for the real world and won't be for several years, but obviously there's a lot of political ideology that will stand in the way.
Okay, to complement that. So technology is both the cause and the solution of most of our severe problems in a sense. But of course, smart money can address the issues that Julian brought up there, in particular that by creating a fair taxation. And if we can prevent corruption on a global scale or anti-money laundering that can be used to and be distributed in a more fair sense, that would be a great achievement to address those more issues of greater concern, like inequality, not only within the western part of Europe, but also on a global scale. So if we can more fairly distribute our money with smart money, I think that would be a great achievement.
All right. I see that we have some really, really good questions in the chat. So I want to hand over to Jeanette, who will ask some of our participants to unmute themselves and ask the questions directly.
Yes, first I have to allow this. Now you can unmute yourself. There are a lot of questions from Dan Feldman. Maybe you can start with the first one and then go on with the conversation. Dan, maybe you want to unmute yourself.
Okay, let me see. I'm not sure I can find it again. Where was that? Yeah, I guess I was commenting either on the first presentation and also the second presentation that there, I guess primarily the second presentation, that I thought that there were a lot of assumptions that were being made, and I believe that Julian addressed them very eloquently, and I've made several of those myself in my own work. That I think to look at it from, you know, a banking and a monetary perspective and applying artificial intelligence algorithms to a problem using this neoclassical approach, it's just going to further aggravate the neoliberal, the destructive neoliberal effects that we've seen in the economy. So it just seems to be more of this extreme centrism that I think we've seen, this extreme neoliberal centrism. And I think without inquiring into a broader scope, the population, what are the needs, what are the criteria, what are those deeper philosophical questions that are not being addressed by the economy, that I think Julian sort of outlined, and sort of iterating on those and going deeper on those and remaking the entire economy. It's not taking the economy that we have, applying AI to it and saying, let's optimize this. That's just not going to get you anywhere. I think I've said enough.
Alex, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I suppose there are some elements of the economy, or the kind of neoclassical economy, that might be difficult to remove, such as the way that we describe utility and what agents ultimately, and what happiness looks like. You know, we do simplify that quite a bit, but I think one of the powers of this approach is that we can move away from some of these assumptions and these rather simplistic models and get rid of the traditional models that have been used. For the work that I was presenting, and by the way, I very much agree with what you said. But for the work I was presenting, we're sort of tethered to some of those neoclassical models for the sake of being able to compare to them and to demonstrate a proof of concept. I think as we embrace more complexity, more nuanced decisions of how to model an economy or a society, we necessarily have to move away from those types of models and be more honest about what we want to actually try to simulate and what the features of that simulation should include and who the stakeholders are and how they're being represented, and all of these important questions.
Jonas, do you want to add something, or?
No, I think Alex responded there, but I think the one thing that is a little bit beyond the scope of AI here is basically who should create money. That is the fundamental question we talk about money in that sense. Today we have a system where banks create most of our money. The fundamental question, should they be allowed to create money in the future? Should that be done by the government or the central banks? But that's a little bit, it's a really interesting issue, but it's a little bit beyond the scope of this conversation.
Thank you. Dan, you want to ask one more question because there have been a lot? Otherwise, I would hand over to somebody else. Then?
Yeah, I guess I would pose a question to Julian, because I guess I'm resonating with his critique. I guess my question to Julian would be, where do you see the most promising way, and I'm using kind of a term here which you didn't use, what some people are calling like a well-being economy, something that an economy that benefits both people and the planet, that understands the intrinsic value of nature and the dignity of people, and is based on integrity and dignity and well-being. How do we move in that direction?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, first of all, Silicon Valley and tech generally has done so much to contribute to our lives and, create these innovations that touch all of us. I do worry sometimes that it is a very to the book Silicon Valley approach to try and deal with this issue, to essentially create a surrogate for a very complicated approach that is not just deeply quantitative, but deals with values, questions about human dignity, questions about what kind of society we want to live in, that are all encapsulated within economics and the economic policies that are represented by the answers that we make. So in terms of the implications of AI, I think there's a lot that it could be used for. I think purely on the front of data collection and data analytics, the opportunity there is tremendous, and to a large extent, I think it's already being used for that purpose. And it would be interesting to see the ways in which policy can be more informative and useful to the people it serves with AI. The point that I would make is, to your comment, we bring our values to the AI systems that we create. The notion that AI just sort of adopts, an optimal outcome, whether it's that ends up being neoliberal or ends up being economically conservative or economically progressive, doesn't seem right to me. What seems right to me is we bring a certain set of values to that system, and that system ends up calcifying that and maybe making us more efficient at that job. The one danger I see actually is not, in terms of the system itself, it's the rhetoric around the system. It's the framing of, something like AI economist or something of this ilk, as if it is, unequivocally, an optimal solution that transcends the biases of ordinary folks and, people.
Thank you. There is also an interesting comment from Claudia Kornick about privacy. Maybe you want to share your thoughts, Claudia?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, this is the thing which bothers me actually quite often. When I talk, for instance, with my bank consultant, or I just go to the bank to make some transactions, I can feel that they know what I'm spending money on, and that's not really comfortable for me. And I also wonder, if those data collected by bigger institution could be, I don't know, handled to corporations, or I don't know, institutes which are steered by governments. How can we, feel safe? Because I don't want my government, unfortunately, not really good right now in Poland, to have informations on me. So this is it.
So maybe I could respond to that one. Of course, smart money will create new type of privacy issues in different ways. Should the bank, okay, you could say that banks on one hand know quite a lot what we spend our money on, but Facebook and Google knows even more in detail what we are doing. So this will create this new type of privacy issue. But then, from my background coming from Sweden, where we have Sweden, also together with Denmark and Norway, we are like outliers because in the sense how we trust the government. So we're doing a paper on the evolution of money and payments in Sweden. And what is fascinating in that story is that this trust between the citizens and the government has been an ongoing process since the 1600s. And basically the only king who did, in a sense, screw some part of the population was Gustav III, and he was killed. So trust is like an essential part. And in many countries there is this distrust between the citizens and the government or the banking sector or the system in that sense. So how this will play out would be very, very contextualized. And I know in Germany they love or they prefer to use cash compared to card to large part of historical reasons, and in other countries as well. So there's this thing with trust that is very different between countries, and that also has a reflection into our willingness to pay taxes, which we do a lot in my part of the world at least. So
I think that willingness to pay taxes is correlated with how the government is actually those money using. So
that is the trust. We trust that the government will not totally misuse the money. So we have a relatively low degree of corruption and so on. And this comes back to trust, and this trust between the government or the state and the citizens has something that has matured over 300 years. So it's hard to replicate for someone else.
Yes, but the problem is that somehow our system is not that much developed as Western European systems, while they are using the technology which is up to date. And there is this gap which can be misused, and I see a danger in it. And it's hard to fight with it as a single person if those resources are in hands of people like in China and yeah.
I saw the comment there about China there. Yeah, they are as cashless as Denmark or Sweden in that sense, but they do have a different type of trust mechanism in a sense that there's a system and everyone works for that system.
Yes, but actually they cannot log off because they use an ID card for a bus, they use a ID card for withdrawing money, for everything. So there is no way to go out of it. It's I don't think it's a trust, it's just surveillance, a modern method of surveillance.
Yeah, I agree on that one.
So thank you. I would also invite Eric Stubbs, if he is still with us, to ask his question.
Thanks, I appreciate it. And thanks for organizing this, and also to the speakers, all of whom I thought were excellent. My question is for Alex, and it has to do with your model and specifically what you mean by productivity in the model. And so let me give you two alternatives. One is you have a notion of private productivity, which is what the individuals do, or you have a notion of economy-wide productivity, which would have to include how tax money is spent. And there's presumably a difference from a productivity level between tax money being spent on an interstate highway or school versus to buy aircraft and tanks. So can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by productivity and how it's measured in your model?
Sure. So just to that last part of the question, it's quite simple. In our model, productivity is literally just the sum of all the incomes that the agents earn. So it's more or less like GDP. There are various reasons that we would want to measure productivity as a goal. One criticism I do here is that it seems a little bit like a little too familiar with over promoting productivity, but we do it as a proxy for agents being able to maximize their own happiness. That the first part of your question though, what if we used, instead of redistributing the tax funds, we gave it to some other thing, how would that affect productivity? I think that's a great question. Right now, our model doesn't have that level of complexity to address that question. Taxes are collected in the model and then redistributed equally, lump sum. So there's no element of investing in tanks or what have you. So we're making an assumption that every tax dollar becomes a public dollar that every other agent essentially shares in, which is a simplifying assumption to make this more tractable for the stage we're at. Obviously doesn't really capture how it's used in the real world, where the government uses tax money to fund public projects or things like the military or what have you. That, of course, could have a number of downstream effects. Maybe it would affect the simulation in a way that would impact productivity, like if we made a way for the government to be able to invest in education, put that in the simulation, or it could invest in things that some agents prefer and others don't, like parks. All of these are possibilities for us to explore that aren't currently addressed at the level of complexity in our current simulation, but are things that we would like to bring into future iterations because they're important questions.
Right, thank you. So clearly models iterate and improve with their iterations, and I appreciate that. It sounds to me like your current model is dealing with taxation as if it's essentially a transfer mechanism and nothing else. So in that kind of environment, raising or lowering tax rates really ought not affect productivity, because all you're doing is transferring money from one entity to another. It affects productivity because agents still bear a cost for earning income. And if they don't get to keep the income that they earn, they're less incentivized to work for it. So their natural response to higher taxes is to earn less income. So there's less income to redistribute, and that shows up as less productivity. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And I think we have to end. I will allow one more question, maybe one more philosophical question from Marina Ludemann, who's asking about what we mean when we speak about productivity. Marina, do you want to speak out?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is a basic question of how to define value. And I agree with Julian Jacobs that inequality is not something that has to be there forever, or even has to increase. We can do something against it, but maybe there are also economists who don't want to change anything, and it also has to do with how we define value. There was another chat saying that it's difficult to define care, for example, or to measure the value of care. But on the other hand, we say that, for example, financial transactions, they enter the GDP. This is completely because that's somebody's interest.
I could take a stab at trying to answer that to start off. That sounds good. I mean, just in terms of the economics of it, definition of productivity that, I think is most commonly used is just, output per worker. So how much is being produced by worker? That's just, your kind of textbook definition. But I think that the question of productivity more broadly is just such an interesting one to think about within the context of AI for a few different reasons, because it really gets us back to this, initial question of how we want to experience economic growth in a time of technological advancement. Point one is that actually economists are worried, or have been worried for decades, about declining productivity. We haven't seen productivity growth. And that is one of the ways historically that, economies get richer over time. The great irony of technological innovation has historically been, it produces immense growth, but that growth and that new accumulation disproportionately goes into the hands of people who own capital or work in industries or have skills that are complemented by those new innovations. And so the irony is that this thing that really is, should be fantastic in terms of the long view of economic historical progress, we end up at a point where that very thing threatens to crumble under its own weight because of the inequity that it spurs, and because of, some of the things that I pointed out in the talk earlier, the various ways in which inequality just is not particularly sustainable. And this is why time and time again, after technological innovation produces inequality, we see a consistent movement under pressure to try and curtail inequality and prevent the economy from collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions.
Thank you very much, Julian. I'm afraid that we have to come to an end. And at the end of the couch lesson number 17, it was already, I want to thank Jonas, Julian, and Alex, as well as Martin and my colleagues. It was a great pleasure, and I hope we can stay in touch. It turned out that, again, questions about different aspects of AI raises very deep questions related to totally other fields of human life, especially about our values. I hope that everyone here will join us during our next couch lessons from November 25 to December 16. We invite you to 4 additional episodes. We will speak about AI and nature, AI and sports, AI and inclusion, and the last episode will be about AI and the future. Would be great to see you again at the end of November. Please spread the word and share the information about the couch lessons throughout your social media channels. You can find more information about the upcoming couch lessons as well as the videos of the past ones on our website. It's goethe.de/couchlessons. Thank you very much for joining us.